Why did some of the greatest rock stars hate Led Zeppelin? Led Zeppelin had plenty of detractors despite their enormous popularity and impact, but I haven't liked a single one of them. Action that some of them, who are also rock stars, have taken, whether it was charges of plagiarism, hubris, or just a conflict of musical ideologies. Baby, several well-known musicians expressed their distaste for Zeppelin in no uncertain terms. Here are some rock performers who detested Led Zeppelin, from savage rivalry to downright insults. Pete Townshend: I detest the fact that I'm ever even remotely comparable to them. In a 1990s interview, Townshend candidly declared that he doesn't like Led Zeppelin's music and that he hasn't liked anything they have ever done. His dissatisfaction extended beyond the music. He also objected to the two bands' similarities, highlighting the fact that he detests the fact that The Who are something like them. This attitude shows not only his great conviction in The Who's but also his personal dislike of Zeppelin's manner, unique artistic identity, the competition, or more accurately, Townshend's one-sided critique results from profoundly different approaches to music and performance, whereas both bands were renowned for their impactful live performances and methods that had a significant influence on rock music. Were very different, with Jimmy Page and Robert Plant leading Zeppelin. John Bonham and John Paul Jones had a strong blues foundation, and extensive complex guitar solos are a common feature of improvisational jamming. Fantastical lyrics and a theatrical presence that was larger than life. The Who, meanwhile, took a more methodical approach, with Townshend's emphasis on conceptual albums that tell stories and a more aggressive and percussion-heavy. Townshend's critiques of Zeppelin's guitar approach extended beyond their music, as well as the band members personally, and he recognized Jimmy Page was not entirely supportive of Robert Plant's vocal delivery, despite his technical prowess as a guitarist. Has stated that he thought the band's style and methodology were self-indulgent. On the other hand, Townshend's own works, especially in rock operas like Tommy and Quadrophenia, were primarily story-driven, striving for a dramatic and cinematic feel that established The Who. Despite Townshend's distaste, Zeppelin's more blues-driven bombast, there was no overt hostility between the two bands' members, according to Led Zeppelin. In fact, Jimmy Page and Robert Plant, John Paul Jones and others have praised The Who on a number of. John Bonham, a Zeppelin drummer renowned for his booming and inventive drumming style, was also a huge fan of the legendary drummer from Keith Moon. The Who individual members' regard for one another emphasizes that Townshend's viewpoints were his own and did not inevitably show a continuous competition between the two bands as a whole. Interestingly, Led Zeppelin's popularity and impact remained constant in spite of Townshend's. Despite criticism, they went on to become one of the best-selling and most admired rock bands of all time, solidifying their reputation. Through records such as Houses of the Holy and Led Zeppelin 4 Physical Graffiti, The Who, meantime, forged their own illustrious career by influencing punk power, pop and alternative music, with their dynamic live performances and profoundly thought-out works. David Crosby: during Crosby's interview, he stated unequivocally that he did not like Led Zeppelin. I never liked Led Zeppelin, and I don't possess any of their albums, and I consider them to be among the most overrated bands ever. These comments caused a stir. The music community, since Led Zeppelin is considered by many to be among the best rock bands ever, and they are well known for their. Robert Plant was a member of the band, which was known for its inventive sound, strong performances, and revolutionary contributions to the genre. Numerous others have been influenced by Jimmy Page, John Paul Jones, and the late John Bonham. Musicians and, even after several decades, remains a defining influence in rock music. Crosby's open rejection of Led Zeppelin at their disbandment instantly generated controversy. Some musicians and fans concurred with his assessment, claiming that the band's music was either overhyped, or some viewed his remarks as unjustified criticism from an artist with a completely distinct style, while others regarded them as derivative. Crosby's folk and harmony-driven compositional background and approach to rock songs with CSNY notably different from Zeppelin's hard rock and blues-influenced sound, thus it's hardly strange that he wouldn't connect with their music on a human level. But after the criticism later on, Crosby changed his mind, particularly about Jimmy Zeppelin's guitarist and lead songwriter. In a follow-up explanation, he recognized Page's exceptional talent. This admission, which he described as one of the best guitarists he had ever seen, was noteworthy because it suggested that even while Crosby might not have liked Zeppelin's sound or manner in general, he might still enjoy the members' technical expertise and creative talents. This wasn't the first time Crosby had made over the years. He has made frank or contentious remarks about various performers. Gained a reputation for being vocal and frequently expressed strong views regarding musicians. From Bob Dylan to Eddie Van Halen's critical attitude occasionally resulted in conflicts, but it also highlighted his dedication to his own musical preferences and standards. During the classic rock era, band rivalry wasn't always cordial and few as vocally as Cream did. Bands voiced their distaste for Led Zeppelin during the band's rise to fame and influence in rock. There is no denying that today's Cream members Jack Bruce, Ginger Baker, and one of the band's most vocal critics was Eric Clapton, who used harsh language about Led Zeppelin are a blend of individual musical preferences, philosophical beliefs, and perhaps even the bassist and vocalist for professional rivalry Jack Bruce Cream was especially critical of Led Zeppelin. His criticism went beyond simple dislike to include blatant. Prior to his death in 2014, Bruce made it apparent that he had no admiration for Zeppelin's musical abilities, notably declaring that John Bonham couldn't swing a sack, of a term that implied he didn't find Bonham's drumming particularly inspiring or inventive. Bruce continued to produce the subtle groove that many drummers aim for, stating that Led Zeppelin had always been a joke and would never be anything at all. Of course, turned out to be completely wrong about Zeppelin's legacy, but it does show Bruce's ingrained prejudices against their jazz-influenced musical approach. Bruce, a musician, perhaps thought Zeppelin's blues rock style was too flamboyant, devoid of the creative skill with which Cream frequently used. Ginger, the renowned drummer for Baker, Cream had similar criticisms of Zeppelin, particularly John Bonham's playing. Baker is renowned for his complex polyrhythms and drumming inspired by jazz. Have denigrated rock drummers for relying more on volume and force than technical skill, and Baker rejected Bonham's abilities in several interviews, saying that he lacked the swing and grace of a Baker who had always took great satisfaction in his profound knowledge of jazz rhythms, and saw Bonham's drumming as unlike his old comrades Eric Clapton, who were more straightforward and overhyped. Although he wasn't particularly complimentary of Led Zeppelin, he wasn't completely dismissive either. Although he agreed that there were elements of Zeppelin's music that he liked, Bruce and Baker eventually thought their noise was too loud. It was excessively loud. Clapton said that many musicians and critics shared this sentiment. Of the time believed that Zeppelin's loudness occasionally overpowered the melodies of their songs, although Clapton acknowledged that, in contrast to Bruce and Baker, he enjoyed some of Zeppelin's songs, even though they weren't totally to his liking. Clapton's own strong ties to blues-based rock music make his position especially intriguing. Like Led Zeppelin, but Clapton's technique was more conventional and sophisticated blues. Zeppelin's methods were frequently more violent, warped, and exaggerated. It's probable that Clapton, who arrived from the 1960s British blues explosion and was, in many respects, a purist. Zeppelin's over-the-top interpretation of the genre may be the cause of Cream's using harsh language. There are a few possible reasons for Cream's critical viewpoint. Despite the musical distinctions, Cream of Led Zeppelin, who invented hard rock in their own right, have strong roots in jazz and blues traditions, frequently relying on Zeppelin, however, took blues to the next level in terms of improvisation and melodic nuance, and greatly increased its volume, making it louder, heavier, and more. This may have looked overly dramatic to Cream's members, especially Baker and Bruce, who prized professional competition in terms of technical accuracy and groove. By the time Led Zeppelin was, Cream had already broken up when they made waves in the late 1960s, so it's probable that Zeppelin's enormous success in a genre that Cream helped pioneer, however, caused considerable bitterness. Despite Cream's considerable influence, Zeppelin attained a degree of popular supremacy that Cream had not attained. Notwithstanding personal conflicts, Ginger Baker and Jack Bruce were well known for because of their strong personalities, scathing attitudes, and disrespect for Led. They weren't scared to voice their opinions. It's possible that Zeppelin was motivated as much by personal preference as by a sincere conviction that the band lacked musical rock music. Cream's depth. Generational transitions were a component of a previous phase of British rock that put an emphasis on improvisation and musicianship more in line with jazz. Despite their undeniable talent, Zeppelin adopted a style that was more dramatic and flamboyant, which some more senior musicians perceived as a departure from the creativity they valued. Bob Dylan, who is among the most admired and mysterious figures in music history, have never been inclined to adopt fads or flatter their peers. To other performers, especially those he might not have personally admired, was frequently characterized by one such instance of distant or even contemptuous behavior that has now turned into an iconic moment for music lovers. Happened in 1974 when Dylan gave a cold snub to the match. Took place in Los Angeles and was led by Zeppelin's strong manager Peter Grant. By this point, Angeles, a city that had long served as a gathering place for rock royalty, Led Zeppelin had reached the height of their fame as rock stars because to their thrilling fusion of hard rock with blues and their larger-than-life theatrical appearance has gained them a devoted following around the world. Under the astute and frequently under Peter Grant's domineering leadership, the band had not only had tremendous commercial success but also transformed the music business by claiming previously unheard-of authority over their touring and financial careers. Arrangements. In spite of Led Zeppelin's supremacy in the rock industry, Bob Dylan, a performer with by the 1960s, he had seemingly solidified his own legendary status. Unimpressed, Peter Grant would have anticipated at least a nod of approval when he went up to Dylan to introduce himself. Recognition from the folk rock legend rather than Dylan, who is renowned for his witty remarks and frequently uncensored comments, produced a chilly response that gave little opportunity for greetings. When Grant says, "Hello Bob, my name is Peter Grant, and I manage," Dylan responded sharply, "Led Zeppelin, should I come to you with my issues?" This brief conversation made it apparent that Dylan had little interest in Led Zeppelin or their imposing influence in the music business, but Dylan's contemptuous reaction might have been meant as a light-hearted joke, but it also spoke to a more profound lack of rapport. Or it is commonly known that Dylan's musical sensibilities were frequently praised for the British rock giant. Based on traditional American songwriting themes and folk blues, which while found in Zeppelin's songs were frequently overpowered by the band's flamboyant sound, lengthy improvisations, and strong amplification, Dylan's seeming disdain for Led Zeppelin stands in stark contrast to the appreciation Robert Plant, the lead singer for Zeppelin, has a special place in the hearts of the band members. Throughout his solo career as a guitarist, Dylan was often mentioned as an inspiration, and he even covered his songs. Known for his complex songs and electric guitar prowess, Jimmy Page acknowledged Dylan's. Despite this biased adoration, Dylan's unmatched songwriting talent never appeared to meaningfully return the feeling. According to David Bow's opinions, David Bowie might have thought Zeppelin's blues-heavy hard rock style lacked the nuance and complexity he was looking for in Zeppelin's music-driven lyrics frequently dealt with mysticism, Hyenism and fantastical components that, however potent and evocative, may not have. Bow's assessment of their music as shallow is in line with his ideas of artistic creativity and storytelling. And immature implies that he would have thought Zeppelin's music lacked more inventive or in-depth topic investigation. Despite his criticism, Bowie's songwriting was at least compared to his own or other artists' work that he respected. Not completely discount Led Zeppelin, he singled out Jimmy Page for accolades, describing him as a fantastic guitarist. Page is widely recognized as one of the greatest rock guitarists of all time, was renowned for his inventive playing methods, brilliant riffs, and innovative application of studio recording techniques. And Bow's acknowledgement of Page's skill implies that he valued each Zeppelin member's unique technical and artistic qualities, even if the band's general musical style did not particularly appeal to him, but it was intriguing. The Superman song's beginnings provide a link between Bowie and Page, which Bowie credited in his 1970 album The Man Who Sold the World. Page gave him the song's riff, claiming to have gotten it from the guitarist 5 years prior to the tune was really produced and made available, indicating that the song's concept unique guitar element would have been created in 1965. When Page was still. The nature of this interaction was that he was a session musician who had not yet joined the Yardbirds or founded Led Zeppelin. Is still a little unclear, considering that Page was quite involved in the London music scene at the time. There is some conjecture that he and Bowie met in a way that made it possible for them to share this musical concept. The riff may have been played by Page during a jam session, or it may have been heard by Bowie during a recording session in which Page, regardless of the specific circumstances, Bowie acknowledges that Page had an impact on the Supermen. Considering the guitarist's influence on rock music, which extends beyond his collaboration with Led Zeppelin, Bowie's connection with in the end, Zeppelin's music embodies his larger creative philosophy throughout his career. He consistently aimed to question musical norms by combining a variety of inspirations from his criticism of art rock, electronic music, soul, and even avant-garde theater. Zeppelin's portrayal as shallow and immature raises the possibility that he thought their style was more conventional or more progressive than the type of experimentation that drew him in. But his respect for Page highlights the capacity to spot extraordinary talent in musicians whose work did not always fit with his own preferences. Keith Richards's interview from 2004 when he spoke up about Led Zeppelin and offered insight into his viewpoint on one of the greatest legendary bands of all time, and if his comments weren't completely contemptuous, they made it apparent that Zeppelin was never one of his favorite bands. The response indicated a lack of enthusiasm but also a fair amount of respect for each member of Led Zeppelin. He recognized Jimmy Page as one of the main contributors to the band's overall sound. Greatest guitarists he had ever encountered, which was a flattering remark from someone of Richards' caliber. Not only a skilled guitarist but also a gifted songwriter, producer, and arranger who was instrumental in influencing Led Zeppelin's sound. But even while Richards praised Page's skill, he seemed to infer that he didn't connect with the band's overall music in relation to John Bonham. Although Richards called him a powerful drummer, he also said that he thought Bonham's approach was too forceful. This description supports the idea that, despite Bonham's drumming's great power and influence, might be very forceful, and Bonham's method was distinguished by he stands out among many thanks to his thundering fills, deep grooves, and ferocity of his peers. But for someone like Richards, who had a strong foundation in blues rhythm and blues, and the ferocity of Bonham's drumming in early rock and roll may have seemed overly dramatic given Richards' remarks about Robert. He recognized Plant's enthusiasm, but they were arguably the least enthusiastic of all as a frontman, but implied that he wasn't all that different from other rock vocalists of the time. Bringing up The Who's Roger Daltrey in particular, as well as his own, this comment from bandmate Mick Jagger highlights a prevalent criticism of Plant's despite being unquestionably strong and influential, vocal style might not have stood out in Richards' mind as being drastically different from his contemporaries, in contrast to what both critics and admirers frequently laud Plant for having a soaring range and being one of the best rock vocalists. The most remarkable aspect of Richards' performance was his passionate delivery and stage presence. His final statement was assessment, but in my opinion, Led Zeppelin is Jimmy Page. If you to sum up, this phrase implies that even if he recognized the band's particular skills, he considered Page to be Zeppelin's one defining characteristic. Important viewpoint. Since Led Zeppelin was frequently perceived as a perfect combination of four musicians with different but complementary skills, but Richards' comment minimizes Page's importance and diminishes the band's core. The other members' contributions and Richards' viewpoint. Probably the Rolling Stones formed as a result of his personal experiences and musical taste. Had a blues and rhythm and blues-based sound in the early 1960s, focusing on songwriting skill and groove sense, but Zeppelin also have influenced by deep blues. Their strategy was more opulent with a heavier, more explosive sound that combined elements of heavy rock and psychedelic folk. In contrast to Zeppelin, the Stones frequently used a looser, groove-oriented rock sound. Favored sonic experimentation and technical skill. In light of these distinctions, it makes sense that Richards might not have personally connected with Zeppelin's music. Furthermore, there has always been a slight but discernible gap between Led Zeppelin and the Rolling Stones. Despite being powerful forces in rock music, both bands worked in distinct fields and hardly ever interacted. In contrast to bands like the Beatles or The Who interacted with Zeppelin, the Stones more directly, and Zeppelin mostly stayed in their own lane. therefore Richard's remarks might be a reflection of this wider musical difference. Between the two bands' philosophies and cultures, Joni Mitchell's first significant public criticism of the